In 1931, a pound of ground beef sold for just 9 cents at the neighborhood butcher shop. It wasn't considered a special indulgence, it was a necessity. Families relied on it to get by, and mothers became experts at making a little go a long way, turning 1 pound into 3 meals, sometimes even 4 if no one asked for seconds. To stretch it further, they blended it with fillers like oats, crushed crackers, or stale bread softened in milk until it formed a thick mixture. Cooked slowly with onions, the meat released a rich golden fat, which they would then spoon over whatever ingredients they had left in the kitchen, creating a filling meal out of almost nothing. And here is what nobody talks about. Some of those recipes were better than anything you will find in a restaurant today. Number 7 on this list feeds 8 people for under $1 using today's ingredient prices. Number 3 was so filling that Depression-era families called it the forget the hard time supper. And number 1, grandmothers passed it to daughters in whispered kitchens, knowing that if the hard times ever came back, this was the recipe that would see the family through. 25 million Americans were unemployed by 1933. Bread lines stretched around city blocks. Families loaded everything they owned onto flatbed trucks and followed harvest work west. But in the kitchens of those who stayed, something remarkable happened. Women who had never thought of themselves as cooks became alchemists, turning the cheapest cut of meat into something that tasted like survival, community, and home. Before we start, hit subscribe, because what you are about to learn might be the most important cooking knowledge hiding in plain sight. Let us count down the 25 forgotten poor man ground beef recipes from the Great Depression. Number 25, hamburger soup. Every Depression-era kitchen had a soup pot that never fully emptied. Mothers browned a 1/4 pound of ground beef in a cast-iron pot, draining nothing because the fat was flavor. In went diced potatoes, whatever carrots survived the root cellar, a chopped onion, and 2 quarts of water. Sometimes a spoonful of flour was stirred in for body. Salt and pepper came from the tin on the windowsill. The whole pot simmered for an hour on the back of the wood stove. By 1932, the USDA reported that soup had become the single most consumed meal in unemployed households across the Midwest. Families stretched one pot across 3 days, longer if they added more water and a handful of dried barley. Children ate in silence, watching the steam rise. Fathers came in from looking for work, sat down without speaking, and ate 2 bowls. The hamburger gave the broth a meatiness that vegetables alone could never achieve. Today's restaurants call this vegetable beef soup and charge $14 a bowl. Your great GE grandmother made it for $15. Number 24, oatmeal meatloaf. Here is where the Depression kitchen showed its genius. A pound of ground beef alone could not feed a family of 6. But a pound of ground beef mixed with a full cup of dry oats, 1 egg, a grated onion, and enough milk to bind it, rolled into a loaf pan and baked an hour, that fed everyone. The oats swelled as they cooked, absorbing the meat juices and creating a texture that was dense, moist, and satisfying in a way that pure beef loaf never managed. Some mothers spread a thick stripe of ketchup across the top, that dark red glaze caramelizing in the oven heat, filling every room in the house with a smell that meant supper was almost ready. Children who swore they hated oatmeal ate 2 slices without complaint. By 1934, oatmeal meatloaf appeared in church cookbooks from Ohio to Oklahoma. Modern food writers discovered the same technique and published it in glossy magazines at a premium price. Your grandmother figured it out in 1932 because she had to. It tasted just as good. Number 23, poor man's stuffed peppers. Green bell peppers were cheap enough in summer that farm families could fill a basket for pennies. The filling stretched further. 1/2 pound of ground beef browned with rice cooked directly into the meat, mixed with a can of stewed tomatoes when families were lucky, or just tomato paste thinned with water when they were not. seasoned with salt, garlic salt if the pantry held it, and a pinch of whatever dried herbs grew out back, spooned into the hollow peppers, packed tight, and baked in a shallow pan until the pepper walls softened and the filling bubbled. 6 people were fed from half a pound of meat. The pepper itself became the bowl. Nothing was wasted. Oral histories from rural Georgia recall rows of stuffed peppers cooling on kitchen windowsills, the steam catching the late afternoon light. Mothers made double batches for church socials. Each family brought a pan. Nobody went hungry. Number 22, hamburger gravy over biscuits. This dish shows up in Depression-era cookbooks from Georgia to Montana, always built on the same logic. Brown ground beef, add flour, add milk, season it, pour it over split biscuits that cost almost nothing to make. The gravy turned a half pound of meat into a full meal for a family of 5. The fat from the beef became the base of the roux. The milk stretched it pale and thick over hot split biscuits. It was the kind of food that silenced a table completely. No one spoke while eating hamburger gravy. It demanded full attention. Fathers asked for the pan to scrape. Children mopped every last drop with the final biscuit half. Soldiers who had eaten this in Army mess halls brought the habit home and never stopped. In the South, it anchored the midweek table. In the Midwest, it was simply Tuesday. Today, it appears on diner menus as a featured specialty. In 1933, it was what kept the lights on. A head of cabbage cost 2 cents in 1935. Ground beef cost 9 cents a pound. Together, in a cast-iron skillet with a chopped onion and a generous hand of salt, they made a meal that stretched across 2 days. Mothers browned the beef first, added sliced cabbage and onion, covered the pan, and let everything steam together until the cabbage wilted down to almost nothing, soaking up every drop of meat juice. The cabbage nearly disappeared into the beef. The smell was sweet and savory at the same time. Eastern European immigrant families who filled the steel towns of Pennsylvania and Ohio brought this technique with them. It spread through factory neighborhoods by word of mouth. A neighbor showed a neighbor. By 1936, it appeared in every community church cookbook between Pittsburgh and Cleveland. You could feed 8 people from 1 pound of beef and 1 10-cent head of cabbage. That arithmetic saved families. Number 20, American goulash, not the Hungarian original. This is the Depression invention that fed more American children than any other ground beef dish on this list. Brown a pound of ground beef with onions. Add a can of tomatoes or 2 cups of tomato juice. Drop in 2 cups of dry elbow macaroni and cover the pot. Simmer until the pasta has absorbed every drop of liquid and the whole thing turns into a thick, deep orange mass of meat and noodles. Some families called it slum Guyan. Some called it Johnny Marzetti. Whatever the name, it fed a family of 6 for 30 cents total, kept overnight, and tasted better the second day. School cafeterias served it every Wednesday for decades. The macaroni stretched the meat invisibly. The tomato gave it depth. And the one-pot cooking meant almost no dishes to wash, which mattered in kitchens where hot water was never guaranteed. Pattern break number 1. Here is something the history books skip. During the Depression, the beef industry lobbied to move product that could not be sold as cuts. Butchers took everything left on the block at the end of the day and ran it through the grinder. Families who could never afford a pot roast could afford ground beef precisely because the industry needed to move what it had. Your grandmother's entire recipe tradition was built on an accidental byproduct of industrial meat production, and she turned it into something that fed a generation. Number 19, stuffed cabbage rolls. Where the cabbage skillet meant speed and survival, stuffed cabbage rolls were Sunday. The preparation took all morning. Large outer cabbage leaves were blanched until pliable. A filling of ground beef mixed with cooked rice, grated onion, and salt was rolled tight into each leaf. The rolls were packed into a heavy pot and covered with tomato sauce thinned with water. They were baked slowly for 2 hours. The cabbage softened around the filling. The rice swelled inside the meat. The tomato sauce reduced to something sweet, rich, and dark. Polish families in Chicago made them on Saturday for Sunday dinner. Slovak families in Cleveland made them too. Hungarian families in Detroit made them as well. Each family brought the tradition from the old country and adapted it to Depression-era budgets by stretching the meat further with more rice. A pound of ground beef made 12 rolls. 12 rolls fed the whole family, plus whoever showed up at the door. Number 18, hamburger and bean stew. Dried beans were the Depression kitchen's insurance policy. A pound of pinto beans cost 5 cents and kept in a sealed tin for months. When ground beef could be bought, a 4-pound browned with onions became the flavor base of a bean stew that simmered all day on a low flame. The fat from the beef turned the bean liquid silky. The meat dissolved almost completely, flavoring every bean in the pot. By supper, the stew had thickened to something you ate with cornbread and called a feast. USD, emergency food pamphlets from 1933, specifically recommended this combination as the most nutritionally complete meal possible at minimum cost. Women who received those pamphlets traded them between households, penciling notes in the margins. More onion, cook it longer, better the next day. Number 17, ground beef and potato hash. Monday night was hash night. Whatever cooked potatoes sat in the icebox from Sunday were diced and fried in a skillet with crumbled ground beef, onions, and a heavy hand of salt and pepper, pressed flat and left untouched until the bottom crisped dark and brown. Then it was flipped or not flipped, depending on whether it held together. The crust on the bottom of a proper hash was not an accident. It was the entire point. That dark, salty, caramelized mat of potato and beef and onion was what Depression families ate standing at the stove before the rest of the household woke. Mothers served it with a fried egg on top when eggs were available and without when they were not. Either way, it was ready in 15 minutes, wasted nothing, and tasted better than food that cost 10 times as much. Number 16, Hoover stew. Named for the president many blame for the Depression. Hoover stew was the informal name for a dish that appeared in charity kitchens, church basement, and home kitchens from 1930 to 1935. The original version used sliced hot dogs. When families had a little ground beef instead, it became something better. Brown the beef, add cooked macaroni, canned corn, and canned tomatoes. Let everything cook together until thick and fragrant. The corn gave sweetness, the tomato gave acidity, and the beef gave weight. Children ate this without complaint. It was bright and chunky and carried just enough sweetness to feel like something special. Church ladies served it by the hundred at relief kitchens. The name carried bitterness. The taste never did. Number 15. Meat and bread patties. This is the trick most people have forgotten entirely. Mothers who needed to stretch a pound of ground beef into 10 patties instead of 4 did it with stale bread. 2 slices were soaked in milk until they turned to a soft paste, then worked thoroughly into the raw ground beef with an egg, salt, and pepper. The bread patted the mixture invisibly. The patties came out larger, softer, and more tender than pure beef because the bread kept them from seizing in the pan. Fried in a thin slick of lard and served on day-old bread with mustard, they fed the whole family for 15 cents. Modern chefs later discovered this same technique, renamed it panade, and published it in food magazines at a glossy premium. Your great-grandmother figured it out in 1932 because she had to. It tasted just as good. Pattern break number 2. Here is the part that nobody in the food industry wants discussed. After World War II, food companies spent millions convincing Americans that anything born of poverty was inferior. Convenience foods were marketed as modern, progressive, a sign of having made it. Meat stretching was reframed as something shameful, a sign of not having enough. But food historians have since confirmed what any nutritionist can verify. The nutritional density of Depression-era ground beef meals was often higher than the post-war convenience food that replaced them. More fiber from beans and vegetables, less sodium than canned products, more protein per dollar than any processed meal. Your grandmother was not making inferior food. She was making food that entire industries needed you to forget so you would buy theirs. Number 14, ground beef and noodle soup. Different from number 25, this was thicker, more deliberate. Ground beef browned dry in the pot with no added fat because the beef rendered its own. Onions and carrots were added to the drippings. A generous pour of water brought the pot to a simmer. Dried egg noodles were dropped in raw, swelling fat and soft as they drank up the broth. The pot reduced down to something halfway between soup and stew. You needed both a spoon and a fork. Children found the fat noodles first. Parents ate the broth after. 4 people were served generously for 11 cents. The smell rose through apartment building stairwells from Harlem to the south side of Chicago. In the cold months, it meant more than dinner. Number 13, cornbread topped ground beef casserole. The Depression-era tamale pie stripped of everything but substance. Brown a pound of ground beef with onions, chili powder, and a can of creamed corn. Transfer the mixture into a casserole dish. Then spread a light layer of cornbread batter across the top. Place it in the oven and bake until the cornbread rises into a golden crust, soft and slightly sweet on top, while the bottom soaks up the rich flavors of the meat beneath. A simple all-in-one meal, enough to feed a family of 6. During the 1930s, this recipe became incredibly popular, appearing in dozens of versions in women's magazines. It was also widely shared by the Farm Bureau, often handed out at local fairs and community gatherings.